Welcome to Village in Motion this beautiful day. I hope you're enjoying your day, and I hope that you thoroughly enjoy Who's Who next as we talk about Jim McDaniel, who happens to be a resident here at Green Spring. Jim and his wife, Michelle, has been with us for
3 months.
3 months now, all of 3 months, and we're glad to have you.
Thank you, Clint.
Jim, you kind of came into this world in the mid-1940s, didn't you?
That's right, just after World War II.
Yeah. And kind of grew up in the Boston area?
Yes, yep. A little town called Watertown, which is walking distance to Harvard Square in Cambridge.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, you did a lot of walking around Boston, and you do a lot of riding of the subways and knowing all the ins and outs of getting around without a car, right?
That's right. We did not have a car growing up. As a matter of fact, I went all the way through college on the subway.
Interesting, interesting. Speaking of college, you got into a co-op program when you were in college, right?
Right. I went to Northeastern University, right in downtown Boston. And Northeastern is world famous even today for its co-op program. In my time there, we would alternate 3 months of school with 3 months of work.
Wow.
So it took 5 years to get a degree instead of 4. But you had the benefit of actually sampling your career choice in on-the-job training.
Yeah.
So, and the benefit of also making some money towards tuition expenses.
Which always helps.
Of course, yeah.
But the co-op program was something that was sponsored by the National Park Service, right?
Well, the co-op program is sponsored by Northeastern University,
Okay.
and they place students in jobs
Okay.
that are associated with their career choices. Unfortunately for me, I wanted to be a high school French teacher when I started college, and there weren't many jobs. So I had a couple of jobs. One was in a bank in downtown Boston, and it didn't seem to work out that well. I had a strong interest in history, so my counselor said, well, let's put you with the National Park Service in a historical park. And so I ended up at Minuteman National Historical Park in Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts, where the Revolutionary War began.
Yeah. And my understanding is you really fell in love with the job, you fell in love with the mission, and you fell in love with a lady.
You got it right, Clint. Maybe not in that order. The lady who I met at Minuteman was the superintendent's secretary. And her name was Michelle, and we started dating, and we're still dating 52 years later.
That's tremendous. That's tremendous.
So, but I did, I had no concept of the mission of the National Park Service and the breadth and beauty of our national park system until I started this co-op job there. And through my time there, I learned more about the organization and decided to change my career plan. So after I graduated from Northeastern, I started work as a park ranger for the National Park Service and got sent to Grand Canyon.
Yeah. And you have something from the Grand Canyon with you?
Yes, you know what, at Grand Canyon, it was such a culture shock for me. I grew up in a city in the urban East, and that was my first trip west of the Mississippi. I really enjoyed my time there. I loved the people, and I acquired a real interest in the history of our American Indians, and learned a lot about their art and culture. And I started a little collection of Pueblo Indian art. And this is one example. This is a Jemez storyteller.
Oh, okay.
And you'll see these, they're sort of representative of the family, the strong tradition of the mother and children, and also of the strong oral history tradition. Most of their history is passed down through stories from generation to generation. So the art is simple in some ways, but really beautiful and meaningful.
And you spent, what, a year at Grand Canyon?
I did. And then while I was there, the director of the National Park Service came through looking for some volunteers to start an urban program in Washington, D.C. And I remember him saying, I don't want hunt, trap, and fish types. I want people who are comfortable with the city. So for a boy from Boston who had the definition of the word park as an asphalt rectangle with a basketball hoop at either end, I was comfortable with the city. So I raised my hand, came to Washington in 1970, and spent the whole rest of my career here.
Well, before you did all that, you grew up in Boston. Your father was an upholsterer, right?
Uh-huh.
But he left your family.
Yeah, you know, as I mentioned, I was born just after World War II. Well, my mom came from an Italian heritage. Her mother, my maternal grandmother, came to the U.S. when she was 16. Very poor farm girl, couldn't read or write. Somehow made it here, established herself, built a life here, got married to a man from her original village. My mom was very close to her mom and dad. Well, one of the things my mom did when she was a young girl was she and her girlfriends would go into Boston whenever a ship came in. And they would go to a USO dance and dance with the sailors and have a good time. Well, she met a young, handsome sailor from Arkansas. They fell in love, got married, but the cultural differences were just too great, and it didn't work out. So my dad left us when we were young teens, and we moved in with my grandmother, and my mom got a job in a factory working at night. So I had this real strong Italian cultural heritage surrounding me and my sister with love and nurturing, and so it worked out well.
Yeah. You were always curious about your dad and what he did, and you and your sister decided to go and see if you could find him.
We did. We did some checking. We worked with the Veterans Administration and Social Security, and eventually found him. He had gone back to his hometown of West Helena, Arkansas, and was living a very simple life there. The problem was that he had died a couple of months before we ultimately located him. But we did close the loop. We arranged with the funeral director there to move his remains to Cape Cod National Cemetery, where he and my mom are both buried now.
Well, is that part of the Park Service?
No, it's part of the Veterans Administration.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But you were at Northwestern. You got involved in Northeastern, excuse me. Northeastern. You got involved in a lot of activities with history, and you were a language major, right?
That's right. I was a French language major. I had lots of French and Latin in high school, and also in a lot of French courses in college. So I had that background, but you know, it lay dormant in me until I made a trip to Haiti and found that Haiti is a country where French is spoken if you've been to school.
And we're going to get into that in a minute, okay, in regards to it. But when you started with the Park Service, it was a experimental program, right?
That's right. Yeah, there were 12 of us, 6 men and 6 women, and we came to Washington, D.C. We lived in a couple of park houses next to each other, and we experimented with programs that we thought might work in the inner city. And the programs that did work, we kind of packaged them, wrote them up, and exported them to other cities along the East Coast. One of them was at Ford's Theater. You know, Ford's Theater had stopped their inner city school programs because the kids would come, they would be a little bit unruly, they weren't paying attention to the program, and so it just wasn't working, and they had stopped it entirely. When we took a look at that situation, we determined a couple of things. One, kids from inner city DC often left home in the morning without breakfast. So they started their day irritable, unable to pay attention. And then the second thing, which was interesting, was the park ranger standing on the stage at Ford's Theater talking, could very well have been a police officer to them. And so they saw the uniform, they thought police,
Right.
and there was a kind of a little disconnect in those days between the inner city residents and uniformed police officers. So we did two things. We talked with our friends at Giant Food and asked them if they would donate some breakfast foods. And we talked with Catholic University in Northeast DC. They had a very well-known drama department. And we asked if they would take the same historical message about Ford's Theater and do it as a performance with actors and so forth. So we started bringing kids back. We fed them on the bus, gave them a little orange juice, got them settled down, brought them in the theater, and they got the same content, the same historic message, but in a form that they could enjoy, they were entertained by. And it seemed to work. So,
Tremendous.
yeah, there were a lot of those little lessons that we learned and passed along to our colleagues in other cities.
Wow. With all of that, you somehow got associated with the White House, right?
Yeah, interesting the way lives and careers sometimes play out. You know, you have a plan, but it doesn't always go that way. And a lot of us sometimes fight the changes if they're not consistent with the way we plan our lives. But I've always been one to be curious about coincidences and things, and so I kind of followed a different path. What happened was during my time in this program, I worked on a couple of special events at the White House, right. Easter egg roll and tours and things like that, and I got to know the people in the White House Liaison Office of the National Park Service. And so from my first position in DC, I had decided I was interested in the U.S. Park Police. So I was selected for the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, started the program there, and while I was there, a job offer came from the White House Liaison Office.
Okay.
And so I really struggled with that, but I said, I'll give it a try. And so I started sort of as an administrative assistant in the White House Liaison Office, and spent the next 30 years of my career in that same office,
wow.
working my way up to eventually becoming the director.
Right.
It's kind of like the man who goes into a corporation and starts in the mailroom and becomes CEO, you know?
Yeah, I'm sure it felt like that.
It felt like that, yeah.
With that, all of that was under the Park Service, right?
Yeah, you know, most people don't realize how extensive the National Park Service responsibility is at the White House. Yeah. But the White House itself, the building and the 18 acres of grounds are part of our national park system, designated by public law.
Right.
So the Park Service is responsible for the maintenance of the interior of the historic White House, the exterior walls of the main building and the wings, and all of the gardens and grounds, and the historic collection, museum collection. And there's a split responsibility with Secret Service over the tours. The Park Service organizes the tour process, and the Secret Service has officers in the different rooms helping people understand what they're seeing.
Oh, tremendous. And so you had a lot of contact with the occupants of the White House.
Yes. You know, when I first went into the White House Liaison Office, Richard Nixon was president. And when I left, George H.W. Bush was president. I'm sorry, George Bush.
Yeah, right. With that, though, it must have been a challenge to kind of keep things straight and to make sure things got done right the first time.
Yes, it's a very stress-filled position. Any job in the White House, whether it's the National Park Service, the General Services Administration, White House residence staff, Secret Service, military, everything has to be done right, and it has to be done right the first time. There's very little room for error there. And one of the lessons that I learned very early on was that everyone has to work together. Regardless of your agency mission,
Right.
you have to come together as a team to serve the first family, the presidency, and the House itself. The other thing I learned is that the White House is very unique in terms of public institutions, because at the same time it's trying to be a home for a family with all the comforts and conveniences that they need to have to live there. It's the headquarters of the executive branch of our government with all of the official and ceremonial aspects of that. And it's a historic house museum with a very fine collection of American-made furnishing of the period 1800 to 1815.
In fact, you were telling me what, 85% of the materials, the furnishings are actually in storage, right?
That's right. You know, most museums operate that way. What you see on display is just a fraction of what the total collection is. Kind of like an iceberg. You know, you see what's on the surface, but underneath there's an awful lot.
Wow.
And the White House is the same way. Over the years, a lot of furnishings, art, antiques have been collected. There is an overall collections plan that sort of maintains the collection in that early colonial period. But there's not room for it all to be on display. The other unique thing that separates the White House from most museums is that the White House collection is actually used.
Yeah.
The antique furniture is sat on, the tables are eaten on. And so there's a very strong need for continuing preservation and maintenance of the collection.
And so you had all of that responsibility.
Yes, yeah. The National Park Service shares that with the White House curator. The National Park Service maintains the collection facility and handles a lot of the restoration work and so forth, does the transportation. The curator is sort of the face of the collection in the White House itself.
And if it's raining and the president wants to have a big tent out in the yard and have people come in, relatives of POWs and POWs that have returned, you have to deal with that, right?
Yes, one of the first major special events that I was involved with was when President Nixon, welcomed the returning POWs from Vietnam. And there were about 600 guests, and you can't hold a formal dinner and program inside the White House. There's not enough space for that. So we put up a tent on the south lawn and built a stage within the tent. It was really well done. Big chandeliers that were custom made for the occasion by the Park Service metal craft shop. And unfortunately, about 3 days before the event, it started raining in Washington, and it rained and it rained and it rained. And the ground was sopping wet, and we tried to dry it out with big blowers and sheets of burlap. We were unsuccessful, so we dug a big trench around the tent and tried to drain off as much of the water as we could, built plywood flooring and everything else. But there were still a few moments when I looked and gasped as I saw a woman in long gowns and high heels sinking into the mud. But it turned out very well. It was a beautiful event. There were a lot of people from Hollywood as part of the entertainment. Bob Hope put on the show there. John Wayne, whom a lot of our fellow residents would remember from the movies. And it turned out well. And I remember one thing that President Nixon did very quietly. He had a dozen red roses sent to every POW's wife, mother, or significant woman in their lives. And he paid for it out of his pocket and did it very quietly.
Well, other quiet things got accomplished too, didn't it? I mean, like something about some horseshoes.
Yes, when George H.W. Bush was vice president, he was living in the Naval Observatory, which is the official vice president's residence in Washington. And one Friday afternoon, I came back to my office, And there was a phone message from the White House operator, and I called, and she said, hold on for the vice president. And so Vice President Bush came on the line, and it was very rare for me to have a conversation with someone at that level, right. So I was a little bit nervous. But he said, Jim, he said, I'm trying to hold a horseshoe tournament here at the vice president's residence, and I'm having a little difficulty getting the Navy to put together a horseshoe court for me. And someone said that the National Park Service might be able to help. And without really realizing what I was getting into, I said, yes, sir, we can do it. And he said, can you come up tomorrow morning and we'll take a look? Mm-hmm. And I said, yes, sir, I'll be there. And then I hung up the phone and thought, oh my gosh, what have I done? You know, I'm committing to building a sports facility on someone else's territory, not even knowing how to do it. And I called my boss at home, and because it was fairly late, and he said to me, Jim, you've got the ball. Go with it. I'll back you up, whatever you need. So we put together a maintenance crew. I had one of our horticulturists come out with me the next morning. We looked at the site, determined we could start work on Monday. Monday, we put the facility in. Monday night, it was ready to go. Tuesday morning in my office, a courier came in with a note. It was a handwritten note, and it said, Jim, I got off my helicopter at 6 o'clock last night, pitched the first horseshoe at 6:10. Thank you very much, George Bush.
Wow, tremendous. And things happened about that fast also with T-ball, didn't it?
Yes. Another interesting moment. The younger George Bush, when he was president, decided he wanted to highlight T-ball, which is a common sport for right. young American children. And so he wanted to have a T-ball, sort of not really a tournament, but a regular T-ball game mm-hmm. at the White House every Sunday. And so we set up a facility there and got everything put together. And the Friday morning before the first Sunday game, I was in the office of the chief usher, Gary Walters, at the time. And Gary very proudly showed me the box of T-balls that they were going to use for the game on Sunday. And I looked one up, took one, looked at it, and turned it around, and there on the back of the ball, it said, made in China. And I said, Gary, did you realize that these T-balls that we're going to be using at the White House are made in China? And he said, oh my gosh, no. Well, between Friday morning and Sunday morning, there were T-balls made in the USA available for that game. So,
very quietly done, right?
Very quietly, yeah. Probably no one even knows until right now. Yeah. This is an exclusive, breaking news.
But you decided to retire from the Park Service and go to Haiti, right?
Well, yeah, it's another one of those moments that I mentioned earlier where your life takes a turn that you really didn't plan. I was at the height of my game. I was enjoying what I was doing. I had a little clout. I was getting things done. We were doing some major projects at the White House that I was really loving. We took East Executive Avenue, a street that carried 16,000 cars a day, and turned it into a pedestrian mall to make the visitor experience better. We had completely restored all of the exterior stone walls of the White House. I had arranged to have the Park Service document the entire interior of the White House with rectified photography and measured drawings. Believe it or not, that had never been done. Right. Wow. So if there was ever a major disaster or anything, we had a blueprint to work from to restore the building. But one Sunday I was sitting in church and our pastor was talking about making a trip to Haiti to see the results of some work that our parish had funded the previous year. And I said, well, that's kind of interesting. Let me ask about it. and there was one slot left on the trip, and I said, okay, I'll go. I'm curious.
Yeah.
I knew nothing about Haiti at the time, so I reserved my spot, and that was for a trip in February of 1999. Once I started reading about Haiti, I was getting a little nervous. Poorest country of the Western Hemisphere, lots of issues, lots of problems with poverty and disease and lack of clean water. And so I was asking myself, what did I get myself into here? But I went on the trip, and it was a life-changing experience. I came face to face with extreme poverty. I had read about it, I had seen pictures on TV, but when you actually encounter people in an intimate way, you hold their hands, you look into their eyes, you realize that these are people just like you and me. They just happen to have been born in a place where life is very, very difficult. The average lifespan of a man in Haiti at that time was 43 years.
Wow.
Disease was rampant. Hundreds of thousands of people living without clean water, without sanitation. It was just a real disaster. So we looked at the project that we had done. It was 27 houses in a rural area near Port-au-Prince. We saw how happy the people were there. We realized we had made a difference, and we decided to keep doing this, and we called it Operation Starfish.
And the reason for Operation Starfish being, for that name?
The story, yeah, as it goes, we were sitting around the table in the evening talking about our experiences, and there was a little bit of sadness around the table. People were saying, well, we did a good thing here. 27 people are living a better life, but there are so many people, hundreds of thousands of people that don't have enough to eat, have all of these real problems. How can we possibly make a difference? And our pastor, Father Dick Martin, told the story of a child walking along the beach one morning after a storm and seeing this old man throwing starfish back into the water. And the child asked him what he was doing, and he said, well, if I don't get these starfish back in the water before the sun comes up, they're going to dry out and die. And the child says, but look, there are thousands of them. You can't possibly make a difference. So the man picked one other starfish up, and he threw it into the water, and he said, but I made a difference to that one. And so the light came on around the table. We realized, no, we can't solve the entire problem of poverty in Haiti, but we can make a difference one family at a time. And someone else said, let's keep doing this, and let's call it Operation Starfish.
Wonderful, wonderful. And because of you and your group, you've built a number of facilities.
We have, and this is the 25th anniversary of Operation Starfish. And in 25 years, we have built, show you a map here, 13 nativity villages in Haiti,
Right.
with over 1,500 homes. So there are 1,500 plus families right now living a different life in Haiti.
And we have slides that have been be shown with this program that show the fact of what housing was like prior to you coming, what it's like since you've been there, and shows the village also, and the villages. What, you have 300 of them now?
We have 13 nativity villages and over 1,500 homes in those villages.
Yeah.
And we've also expanded to the Dominican Republic, where we've built 3 large greenhouse projects. Jamaica, where we're sponsoring students in medical school. And this year, we're doing our first project in Honduras. We're building a clinic there.
Tremendous. That is tremendous. Jim, you have done a tremendous amount of work with everything you've touched. And you've always been giving in regards to the things that you've done from your description.
Well, Clint, it's we are very blessed in this country, most of us. But if we open our eyes, we can see pain and hurt and suffering, even in the streets of Fairfax County. You don't have to go to Haiti or Africa. There's pain all around us. There are people who are hurting. And I think those of us who have lived a good life, those of us who have some resources, have an obligation to open our eyes, see the people around us, and try to make a difference. Yeah. Now, it doesn't always take money. It doesn't always take doing volunteer work. It can be as simple as acknowledging that street person that you pass by, acknowledging a cashier in a store who's having a bad day. And you do that with a smile, a hello, how are you? Just a sort of expressing a concern for the person you encounter. We all can do that, no matter what our circumstances.
Exactly. So from the White House, the House of Stone, to the villages, that there are now houses of stone, which used to be of just bamboo or whatever they could find, right?
Right.
And we've had historic tours.
Yes. You know, one of the things that's kind of interesting when I look in the mirror is I see a person who has one foot in the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere and another foot in the White House, the first home of the United States. And so I kind of continue to live in both of those worlds. It's a little bit head spinning sometimes, but it's fun. One of the fun things I've been able to do associated with the White House is even after I retired, I'm still associated with the White House Historical Association. I've been on the board since 1983. I've served as an officer for many years, and now I'm an ex officio board member, and I serve on a couple of committees. The White House Historical Association, which anybody can check out at whha.org, has published many books. It also produces the White House Christmas Ornament every year. This is sort of the flagship book, The White House, an Historic Guide. This book was inspired by Jacqueline Kennedy in 1961, and it's now in its 26th printing.
Wow.
And it's the basic guide to the White House, and everyone should have a copy of this at home. And then we also have a quarterly publication called White House History, and this is a subscription publication. Very well done. Top authors and beautiful photography, and they focus on a different aspect of the White House every issue.
And then, if you really want to read about Haiti,
Yes, I would recommend, if you want to learn a little something about the Haitian people, their culture, and the country itself, find a book by Edwidge Danticat, either on Amazon or at your library. She's written several books, and she focuses on what life was like as a child growing up in Haiti. She now lives in the U.S., but continues to write and speak about Haitian culture.
Wow. You've had a tremendous life, and you had so many experiences, and we greatly, greatly appreciate you sharing those with us today.
We're looking forward to continuing that life here at Green Spring. As I said, we've been here for 3 months, and we're enjoying particularly meeting the residents and the staff. There are so many interesting people, so many really kind people, and I'm happy for the great weather now coming, so I can get out and explore some of the areas around us as well.
Sounds great. Again, thank you very much. I hope everybody has learned a great deal, and I know they have, about the White House and about Haiti.
Thank you, Clint. Pleasure being here.
Thank you.